Poison, a word we encounter constantly in everyday life. Not only when we talk about chemicals or dangerous plants, we also talk about toxic or poisonous relationships, give someone we don't like a poisonous look, or classify entire foods as poisonous to our well-being. But here at Insolito, poison is surprisingly rarely an issue. Yet poison murders were almost popular in ancient Rome, if you can call it that. The elite of the time discovered poison as a way of eliminating unwanted rivals as inconspicuously and bloodlessly as possible. The same applies to leaving as few traces as possible. Competition, ambition, and the need to be the leader prevail. The best. Almost like at an elite university, where students try to outdo each other and finish at the top of the rankings. At a university like Tsinghua University in Beijing. And that is exactly where something happened in 1994 that is astonishingly similar to the events in ancient Rome. Zhu Ling was born in Beijing in 1973 and comes from an academic family. Both her mother and father studied geophysics and met during their studies. Zhu Ling has an older sister named Wu Jin. It was virtually a foregone conclusion that the two sisters would one day go to university themselves. But before the younger Zhu Ling can begin her studies, the family is struck by a terrible tragedy. In 1989, Zhu Ling's older sister Wu Jin is found dead. At the time, Wu Jin was studying biology at Peking University. When she has a few days off, she goes on a trip to Yesanpo National Park with friends. But Wu Jin does not return from this trip. Wu Jin fell from a cliff. Zhu Ling was only 16 years old when she had to come to terms with the loss of her sister. She wanted to make not only her deceased sister proud, but also her parents, of course. So Zhu Ling also applied to Tsinghua University in Beijing. And she is successful. Tsinghua has a reputation for being the best university in China. And in a country as education-oriented as China, one can only imagine how demanding it must be to be accepted there. Zhu Ling enrolls there to study physical chemistry. As the name suggests, the subject explores the border area between physics and chemistry. Roughly speaking, it deals with molecular structures, reaction speeds, thermodynamics, and even more complex topics. This degree program is perfect for an ambitious aspiring scientist like Zhu Ling. She's also part of the university's swimming team and a member of the orchestra. All this while passing every exam with top marks. At first, no one is surprised that Zhu Ling's health cannot keep up in the long run. At the end of November 1994, she repeatedly complains of stomach pains. She can hardly keep any food down. You're probably familiar with the expression, stress gets to your stomach. Perhaps Zhu Ling doesn't think much of it at first. But other symptoms appear. The then 21-year-old suffers from increasing hair loss and problems with her eyes. She feels dizzy and can no longer see clearly. Even her glasses are of limited help. But Zhu Ling refuses to slow down. She insists on playing in the orchestra's end-of-year concert. By the end of December, her hair loss is so severe that she has lost almost all of her hair. And on December 23, 1994, Zhu Ling finally pulls the plug. She feels so bad that she checks herself into a hospital. But the doctors there are initially at a loss. Zhu Ling's symptoms go far beyond normal stress symptoms. Since the 21-year-old is studying chemistry, the doctors quickly suspect that she must have come into contact with something toxic. But Zhu Ling herself knows something about her field. She insists that she has never come into contact with any dangerous chemicals. Even though the cause cannot be found, at least the treatment in the hospital is working. Zhu Ling is much more stable and feels much better. After a month in hospital, she's allowed to go home on January 23, 1995. This works out well, as the next semester does not start until the end of February. So the 21-year-old has a good month to recover. Unfortunately, this time will not be enough, because from this point on, everything gets much, much worse. Just a few days after the start of the semester, Zhu Ling experiences new symptoms. She has severe pain in her legs and feet and is becoming increasingly dizzy. These are not only worrying symptoms, but can also be warning signs of a serious illness. The situation continues to worsen until Zhu Ling's parents decide to take her back to the hospital on March 6th. Given her previous history, this time the doctors have a specific suspicion: thallium poisoning. This is because Zhu Ling's symptoms are strikingly similar to those of another patient who was treated for thallium poisoning years ago. Thallium is a heavy metal that is normally only found in laboratory environments. It has no taste or smell. This makes it appear much more harmless than it is. Even small amounts are enough not only to cause serious organic damage, but also to kill a person. However, Zhu Ling is absolutely certain that she has never come into contact with thallium. Therefore, no tests are carried out. Mentally, Zhu Ling is still completely clear and alert. Only physically is her condition continuing to deteriorate rapidly, even in the hospital. The hair loss and stomach pains have returned. In addition, she's experiencing muscle pain and cramps that no longer affect just her legs, but her entire body. The situation escalates to the point where Zhu Ling can no longer even drink. On March 20th, 2 weeks after her readmission, Zhu Ling falls into a coma. The doctors try to stabilize her condition and test the student for all possible syndromes. All without result. When the hospital informs Zhu Ling's parents of the test results, thallium poisoning is listed among the diseases that have been ruled out. This is despite the fact that she has not been medically tested for it. If they had done so, everything might have turned out very differently. In the mid-1990s, the internet was still very different from what it is today. But the online world was beginning to take shape and expand. At that time, there were already a few forums and chat groups on various topics. Zhu Ling's friends knew about them. They were university students in their early 20s and therefore up to date with the latest developments. Unable to bear the uncertainty, they did something that may seem commonplace to us today, but was a novelty at the time. They sought advice on the internet. Two of Zhu Ling's friends wrote an SOS post describing Zhu Ling's symptoms and the course of her illness. They then published this post in various medical forums in the hope that someone can help. Within a few days, they receive a total of 1,500 responses. For 1995, this is an unimaginably large number. Remote diagnoses are always difficult. What's more, Zhu Ling's symptoms are very complex, so it's no surprise that the opinions of the forum members differ. But around 500 of the 1,500 responses come to the same conclusion. It sounds like thallium poisoning. And since the doctors themselves had suspected this at the beginning, this remote diagnosis is even more convincing. But when Zhu Ling's relatives suggest a thallium test, the doctors refuse. They don't want to listen to suggestions from strangers. Because the family doesn't know what else to do, Zhu Ling's parents secretly take urine and hair samples from their daughter at the hospital. They find an outside doctor who is willing to help them and arranges for the sample to be analyzed at another institute. At the end of April, while Zhu Ling is still in a coma, the results come back. It is indeed thallium poisoning, and severe poisoning at that. When this result is received in Beijing, the doctors at the hospital admit defeat and begin treatment. With the right antidote, her life can actually be saved. On August 31st, Zhu Ling wakes up from her coma after more than 4 months. But nothing is the same as before, because the poison has ravaged Zhu Ling's body. Several organs, including her brain, are irreparably damaged. Zhu Ling, who just a year earlier had earned top marks at China's top university, is now at the mental level of a toddler. She is confined to a wheelchair, which she can barely operate. She is almost blind and will not even be able to take care of her most basic hygiene needs in the years to come. When you try to talk to her, even years later, Zhu Ling still believes she is in her early 20s and studying in Beijing. So even though she is at the level of a toddler, she is also stuck forever in her college years. This must be absolute hell, not only physically, but also mentally. And no one knows how the poison got into Zhu Ling's body. Or rather, who slipped it to her, and why. The Chinese police are now supposed to investigate. At least that's the plan. Zhu Ling's parents spoke to the head of the chemistry department at Zhu Ling's University at the end of April, when the diagnosis was confirmed. Professor Xu Fangyu. They asked him to report the case to the police and to back it up with his expertise. The professor then called the head of the university police and described the case. The police chief promised to pass the case on to his colleagues in Beijing. But that never happened. Also, at the end of April, Zhu Ling's aunt called Professor Xu Fangyu. She already suspected that someone must have poisoned her niece. She asked him to treat Zhu Ling's dormitory as a crime scene and to question the other students. But Xu Fangyu replied that this would not be possible. The day on which the diagnosis of thallium poisoning was confirmed was April 28th. And between that day and May 7th, someone must have broken into Zhu Ling's dormitory. However, no wallet or other valuables were stolen, only the following items: a lipstick, contact lens solution, a water cup, shampoo, and shower gel. Perhaps you've already noticed something here. These are all items that involve liquids that come into close contact with the mucous membranes or the skin in general. And it would be very easy to add the powdered thallium that poisoned Zhu Ling to these liquids. It has no smell and no taste. And who looks closely enough at their contact lens solution or shampoo every day to notice a slight blue tinge? Later tests will show that Zhu Ling was poisoned with thallium over a period of months, in 2 stages, probably one before her first hospital stay and one after her return to campus. And now that the diagnosis is known, the very items that may have played a role in the poisoning are missing from her dormitory. It is only after this theft that the police become aware of the case. The university police chief had not informed his colleagues in the city as promised. On May 7th, however, Zhu Ling's parents report the poisoning and also the theft. At first, the investigators are confident. Thallium is not a material that is easily accessible, not even for scientists. The police assume that only about 200 people in all of Beijing had access to the substance at the time. In addition, the dormitories at Tsinghua University are very well secured. Only those who study there can enter the rooms. This further narrows the circle of suspects. Someone who can simply enter the dormitory and obtain thallium without arousing suspicion should actually be easy to find. But unfortunately, the key word here is actually. It is clear that there was competition between students at such a prestigious university. Unfortunately, Zhu Ling herself can no longer be questioned about possible rivalries. Her mental state is too poor for that. While her parents now have to take care of their 21-year-old daughter, the police are investigating the case throughout the year. And they have only come up with one suspect, who has not yet been convicted. Zhu Ling shared the dormitory with 3 other female students: Jin Ya, Wang Qi, and Sun Wei. Sun Wei is in the same degree program as Zhu Ling. They also played together in the university orchestra. Sun Wei is also a top student, but Zhu Ling is simply better, in every way. Sun Wei is superior to her fellow student and roommate in only one thing. Sun Wei has access to thallium. Receipts for the purchase of thallium were found in her research group. She also borrowed specialist literature on poisoning. Incidentally, Sun Wei's mother works at the second hospital where Zhu Ling was admitted, the one where the thallium test was rejected. Sun Wei also comes from an influential political family. So influential that Sun Wei's grandfather is friends with the Chinese president himself. Now you're probably wondering what Sun Wei has to say about all this. The answer is as simple as it is sobering. Nothing. Because Chinese law at the time stipulated that people could only be questioned about a crime if they were also arrested. And there was insufficient evidence against Sun Wei to issue an arrest warrant. The law did not change until 1997, 2 years after Zhu Ling's poisoning. But even hours of interrogation of Sun Wei led to nothing. The police assumed that Sun Wei was jealous of Zhu Ling and her success, and had therefore poisoned her with thallium over a period of months. Although she is clearly told that she is an official suspect, unfortunately nothing more happens in this case. But even in the years and decades after Zhu Ling's poisoning, the case remains popular. True crime is also a popular genre in China. And so internet detectives continue to puzzle over what happened to Zhu Ling and how Sun Wei's guilt could be proven. Eventually, in 2013, particularly astute users discover that she is now living in the US under the name Xian Sun. A petition to the White House calling for the US authorities to investigate her receives more than 150,000 signatures. But nothing came of it. In 2013, Zhu Ling's parents received an anonymous letter from the US. It claimed that all 3 residents of the dormitory had jointly poisoned Zhu Ling. So not only Sun Wei, but also Wang Qi and Jin Ya. The 3 had poisoned their fellow students to drive them out of the university. The 3 had been bullied by her. In addition, Zhu Ling was responsible for depriving her 3 roommates of sleep, which had become an enormous psychological burden over a period of 2 years. The police were never able to find the anonymous author of the letter. The only suspect, Sun Wei, reappeared years later in Australia under the name Jasmine Sun. She works there as a real estate investor. Once again, a petition was submitted to local politicians to launch an investigation. But once again, nothing happened. Sun Wei probably still lives in Australia today. She remains the only person ever suspected of poisoning Zhu Ling. At least, that is what the Chinese police say. Unfortunately, no one can read how they came to this conclusion or what evidence they have. Not even Zhu Ling's family. The files on the case are still kept under lock and key. As already mentioned, Sun Wei's grandfather was a friend of the Chinese president at the time. Her grandfather died in the summer of 1995. Many suspect that his last wish was perhaps that the government cover up the fact that his granddaughter had poisoned another student. This is, of course, only speculation. But if there is any truth to it, then this wish has been fulfilled. As mentioned, Zhu Ling never recovered from the thallium poisoning. Her parents cared for her until the end, even though they were over 80 years old themselves. In 2023, she died at the age of 50 from the effects of the poisoning and a brain tumor. To put it bluntly, one could say that Zhu Ling was slowly murdered over a period of 28 years. This is a very unusual case for Insolito. But I find this story really exciting and moving. I can't think of any motive other than envy. That's why I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on the case. Who do you think was responsible for Zhu Ling's poisoning? And if it was Sun Wei, how did she manage to get away with the murder? I look forward to reading your comments. At the same time, you'll be supporting the channel. Any interaction increases the likelihood that the video will be recommended to people who haven't subscribed to Insolito yet. Other than that, there's not much more to say. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you're watching the video, and hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, ciao everyone.